There, that's better, right? Spider-Man is safe and sound right back in the MCU after giving us a serious scare there for a second. But just because he's back doesn't mean things are going to be easy for him. He's still got to deal with the whole framed for murder thing and everyone knowing his secret identity. Today's video is all about the upcoming Spider-Man 3, meaning what the webhead's future holds, what villain he's going to fight against, and if he's really sticking around the MCU for good. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's get into it right now. Everything seemed to be coming up aces for Peter Parker at the end of Spider-Man Far From Home. He beat the good guy turned obvious bad guy Mysterio, he got the girl, and he just found out that J.K. Simmons was reprising his role as J. Jonah Jameson in the MCU. So obviously Peter was ecstatic, but then things sort of took a slight nosedive. Not only did Mysterio use a last bit of video trickery to frame Spider-Man for his apparent death, but he also outed Spider-Man's secret identity to the world, leaving Peter in one of the worst predicaments out of any MCU hero. Seriously, that cliffhanger was one of the best in any Marvel movie and completely blew up the status quo for the next film. Which is why it was so devastating when it was announced that Disney and Sony couldn't reach a deal and Spider-Man was being plucked from the MCU entirely. But thankfully the sun is shining again, and the two parent companies worked out their differences and agreed to terms that would allow Spider-Man one more MCU solo film and one more team-up flick. Now, that's not exactly a long-term commitment, and in a few years we will go through this process all over again. But at least we have one more confirmed solo movie that will help wrap up all the loose threads that Far From Home left behind. And hey, who knows? Best case scenario is that Tom Holland's Spider-Man can exist in both the MCU and Sony's burgeoning villain-verse at the same time. But now let's focus on Spider-Man 3. What do you think they'll call it? Spider-Man Homecoming a second time? Anyways, what will the MCU Spider-Man 3 even be about? Well, Peter Parker now finds himself in a very unique position. Will public perception change about Spider-Man now that the world thinks he's a killer? It sounds like the constant pressuring of J. Jonah Jameson will eventually lead the public to believe that Spider-Man is the public menace the Daily Bugle thinks he is. What can Peter even do then? Anything good that Spider-Man does will probably be met with boos instead of cheers by the public around him, and it'll force Spider-Man to question his identity as a hero. Does he still feel the need to save people when the world around him hates his existence for unfair reasons? Is a true hero's worth dependent on how the world perceives him? But that's just Spider-Man. What about Peter Parker? The MCU has never really focused on heroes' secret identities before. That all kinda went out the window when Tony Stark proudly declared himself as Iron Man in the first movie. Other heroes like Thor haven't had a need to try to hide themselves, and even Captain America never seemed too concerned about concealing who he really was when he was out and interacting with the world. Peter Parker is the only one concerned with his secret identity, so now everything is in danger with his secret being out. Remember how the point of the first MCU Spider-Man movie was about how Peter Parker needed to learn to keep his feet on the ground and enjoy his time as a teenager? Well, the movie ended with Peter learning this lesson and deciding to stick out the remainder of high school. But now after Far From Home, that's going to be impossible. Peter can't just be the normal high school student he desperately wants to be anymore. As much as Flash Thompson's going to want him around, we don't think a wanted by the law Peter Parker can just stroll into chemistry class and start answering questions. His normal school life is over. But really, it's his relationships that are the most in danger. He just got things going with MJ, but now that the world knows his secret identity, we imagine that Peter Parker will want to distance himself from his loved ones to keep them safe. Knowing that criminals can target everyone important in his life, does that mean Peter has to go underground? Will he take Aunt May with him? If he decides to leave everyone in order to protect them, how does he know the villains will stay away? This is the element that we're most excited about, because now we know the villains are coming, and they have a huge advantage over Peter by knowing where he sleeps at night and who he cares about. Villains have always been one of the best parts of the Spider-Man franchise. The webhead has one of the best rogues gallery in all of comics, and now with the groundwork that was set in Far From Home, we think it's finally time for the Sinister Six to make their grand appearance. Basically a super team of evil, the Sinister Six are a group of villains who band together in their quest to take down Spider-Man. Because time has shown that the little spider has a lot of fight in him. We know that Sony has wanted to make a movie focused on the villain team for years. There was that infamous period of time back when Andrew Garfield was Spider-Man, and Sony had their own separate Sinister Six film in development, with The Amazing Spider-Man 2 being the launch pad for that film. Well, we all know how that turned out. Amazing Spider-Man 2, like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 3 before it, was criticized for overstuffing the movie with too many villains, trying to squeeze Electro, both Green Goblins, and Rhino into its narrative. Sony needed to learn the value of patience in setting up its villains for the future, and we think that's exactly what the MCU Spider-Man franchise has done. It's introduced enough villains and characters in its first two movies to have a believable Sinister Six in the third MCU Spider-Man film. Spider-Man Homecoming laid a great foundation and had excellent pacing when it comes to villains. Yes, it was clear Vulture was the main baddie, but there were enough small introductions that teased future plot points. Not only did we see the Vulture, but we also saw the eventual Scorpion as well as Shocker. All three of these bad guys could feasibly team up again in the future, with the mid-credits sequence even suggesting as much, with Scorpio coming to Vulture and suggesting a team-up. If that wasn't an obvious tease for Sinister Six, we don't know what is. So we already have 3 members of the Sinister Six, but with a name like Sinister Six, you kinda need 6 members. What else would it be called? The Fearsome Five? The Terrifying Three? Nah, Sinister Six just rolls off the tongue, so you definitely need to stick with that number. So who else would be good to join? Spider-Man Far From Home had a character working for S.H.I.E.L.D. known as Dimitri. The character didn't make much of an impact, and he disappeared by the end of the movie, or was he only hiding? Comic fans know that one of Spider-Man's oldest villains is the Chameleon, aka Dmitry Smerdyakov. No way that the writers just happened to throw a Dmitry character in the story without it being a setup to Chameleon, right? So let's say he's lucky number 4. Next up would have to be Kraven the Hunter. In the comics, he's the Chameleon's half-brother, so if we're sticking Chameleon on the team, we have to include Kraven, and watching a brotherly dynamic between the two would be interesting. But after that, well, the team needs a leader. A villain that can successfully wrangle these out-of-control villains and narrow their focus into catching Spider-Man. Really, only 2 villains in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery could do this, and that's Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus, both of which have led the team in the comics. And just because we're tired of seeing Green Goblin on screen, we're going to go with Dr. Octopus as the 6th member of the Sinister Six. Alfred Molina's portrayal of Otto Octavius in Spider-Man 2 is magnificent, but having a new version of Dr. Octopus that's focused on leading a team of supervillains helps us get a new iteration of the character with different motives than his previous big-screen counterpart. We could totally see a storyline similar to the PS4 Spider-Man game where Doc Ock breaks the imprisoned members of the Sinister Six out of jail while recruiting the 2 half-brothers Chameleon and Kraven and forming a super team. Now, you might think Sinister Six isn't the best idea. It does sound like a lot of villains coming at Peter all at once. But think of it this way. From what we mentioned earlier, Peter is going to be on the run and persecuted by public opinion. There would need to be a truly epic threat in order to convince Peter that public opinion doesn't matter, and he needs to step up and save the day. And the Sinister Six is the evil team to motivate him into action. But let's say that Marvel will want to keep Peter fighting one main villain for his final solo movie. That's totally fair and actually might be a better option. Because there's one huge Spider-Man villain that hasn't been adapted properly yet for live action that fans have been begging for years. And that is Kraven the Hunter. Sure, Kraven would work in the Sinister Six like we mentioned before, but there's also a chance for him to be the big bad of the film in a way that totally fits with the story the MCU has been crafting. Now that Spider-Man is a fugitive, it would make sense that someone would come and hunt him down, and really you can't spell Kraven the Hunter without hunting. In the comics, Kraven was a maniacal big game hunter who wanted to take down Spider-Man to prove he was the best hunter in the world. And thanks to a mystical serum, he had heightened senses and super strength. Now we're not saying that's exactly the version the MCU should go with. Marvel has mostly always done a good job tweaking backstories, and as long as they don't make him a boozed-up British actor named Trevor, we think it'll be okay. We think a good route would be an outside source, possibly J. Jonah Jameson, hiring the mercenary and famed hunter known as Kraven to track the fugitive Spider-Man down. It would put the ultimate pressure on Peter because as he works hard to clear his name and protect his loved ones, the master tracker Kraven is always one step behind him, making life a living nightmare for the wallcrawler. One of Spider-Man's most famous comic book storylines is Kraven's Last Hunt, written by J.M. DeMatteis, which coincidentally, DeMatteis was the name of the hotel the kids stayed at in Far From Home, and if you haven't read recently, stop what you're doing and pick up a copy because it's amazing. That storyline has so much to pull from in terms of depth and characterization of Kraven that it could make the Hunter one of the best MCU villains of all time. With the MCU's Spider-Man 3 as of now the last solo film for the character in the MCU, we expect Marvel to pull out all the stops in the trilogy ender, and whether they go with the Sinister Six or just Kraven the Hunter, we can't wait to see what happens. We really hope to get a live-action version of Kraven try to track down Spider-Man in the next movie, but honestly, we're just happy we're even getting another movie. What about you? What do you want to see from a third Spider-Man flick? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more awesome MCU content. As always, thanks for watching.